Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. So today's video is a topic I've done before, but that video is now a few years old, so I wanted to do an updated version, and we're going to talk all about tipping your vendors, which vendors you should be tipping, how much, and when those should happen. So first, let's talk about exactly who should you tip when it comes to vendors at your wedding. So I'm gonna break this down by category from like most commonly tipped to least commonly tipped. So for pretty much every wedding I work, the following vendors get tipped. Any musicians you have and or a DJ, so this goes for ceremony musicians as well as a live band you might have during your cocktail hour or for your full reception, and or a DJ. Pretty much always these vendors are tipped, as well as your hair and makeup artist, just like you would when you go into a salon to get your hair or makeup done, you would be tipping them. Same thing for your wedding. That goes for yourself as well as any additional people they are servicing. Your bartenders and or catering staff. Catering, a lot of times this is included and we'll get into that. But if it is not included, you will tip on your catering staff as well as your bartenders, and any transportation services you are using, whether that is a bus or shuttle, party bus, or private car services. In the next bracket, these are commonly tipped, but not always. That is your photographer or videographer, a wedding planner or coordinator that is separate from your venue staff, and then also any on-site staff or coordinators that might be working directly for the venue. Again, these are commonly tipped, but not necessarily expected. So this is kind of just at your own discretion if they kind of go above and beyond for you, or if you really enjoyed working with them, throwing them a little bit of a tip is always accepted and appreciated. And then finally, this section of vendors I have seen tipped, but it is fairly uncommon to tip these vendors, and that is your florist, your officiant, and any delivery staff you might have. So now let's break it down and talk about each particular vendor and how much you should be tipping them. So start with the section that is most commonly tipped. So any musicians, if this is a ceremony musician, typically you might have like a group of them. So typically it would be like $25 to $50 per musician for that, as they're just probably going to be playing music for maybe an hour, hour and a half if it's going into the cocktail hour. If this is a full band and playing your entire reception, then you're probably going to double that amount. For DJ, if they are doing ceremony and reception, they're going to be there for a pretty long day. Most of the time, I will see this range from $100 to $250 for the DJ for the entirety of the evening. Hair and makeup, much like if you were to go to a salon and have these services done, it's typically customary to tip 20% of the total cost of services. So if you are paying for all hair and makeup services, including moms, bridesmaids, anyone additional that is getting their hair done, then the entirety of this tip would just be added onto your financial responsibility for the hair and makeup artist. So factor that into your overall budget. If your gals are paying for their own services, make sure that you are adding that additional tip into the estimate that you're telling your brides to be prepared for when it comes to the cost, so that they know that tip or gratuity is not included in their price, so that they can come prepared to pay that total amount or have cash on hand to be able to tip them on top of what they are expecting to pay for their services. Your bartenders, so this can vary depending on where your bartenders are coming from. If they are supplied by your catering staff, it is likely that the gratuity will already be included. However, if it is a separate company or if you're hiring them privately or third party, then you will likely want to be tipping your bartenders at the end of the night. So it's usually easier to tip them based on your guest number rather than a percentage of your bar tab or alcohol, because that can be kind of hard to track and that can also get really up there. And it just varies so much across weddings. So there isn't really like a flat percentage service fee that I feel comfortable sharing. I feel like it's easier to just kind of go off of your guest count, as that's the number of people that they're servicing for the night anyway, so it makes sense. And usually like $2 to $3 per guest is kind of a good estimate to go off of for tipping your bartenders. So for 150 guests, you would likely be giving your bartenders around $300 to $500 for a tip at the end of the night, and this would be a total amount that is then split among however many bartenders are actually there at the wedding. And this is pretty customary for a full bar if you're having mixed drinks. If you're only having beer and wine that they're having to serve, then you can maybe do the $1 to $2 range per guest count. So it kind of just varies depending on what you're having the bartenders do. If they're pouring a lot of mixed drinks and having to prepare drinks on the spot for their guests, then you definitely want to be tipping on the higher side. If gratuity is included in your overall bill, then you don't have to worry about writing them a check or giving them cash at the end of the night, but you can offer or allow them to have a tip jar on the bar top so that your guests can tip them additionally if they feel so inclined to do so. Similarly, this is the case with catering. Pretty much always the gratuity is included in your final catering bill, so just make sure that you're looking over that when that time comes. If for some reason it is not included, typically that will be 15 to 20% of the overall food cost. Some of my couples will choose to tip on top of this if they have a lot of additional wait staff that are doing a lot of bussing or walking around and serving guests. If you have a lot of labor and wait staff that are performing more than just the basic like buffet line serving or something like that, a lot of my couples will choose to tip a little bit on top as well. But that's totally up to you. Transportation services. Again, sometimes this is included in the overall bill, so just make sure you're looking for that in your invoice. If it is not, it is pretty common to tip the transportation services. Like I said, whether that is a bus that's just making 1 or 2 trips, or private cars that are going to be making several trips earlier in the evening for smaller groups of people. Usually this will be about 15 to 20% of the total pre-tax cost. So now the vendors that are sometimes tipped but not expected. Your photographer and or videographer, usually this is like 5 to 10% of what the overall photo package that you are paying for would be, and a wedding planner or coordinator. I never expect a tip whatsoever. I will say that these days I get tipped more often than I don't, but it's a very wide range on the amount. And so after asking some fellow planners and coordinators, there's a pretty wide range of tipping, and it's usually not like a percentage of what the total amount is. And usually just kind of a dollar amount based on the level of service they are providing. So if you are working very closely with a wedding planner or a day of coordinator and you felt very at ease from their services, or you just really want to show them some appreciation, anywhere from like $150 to $1,000 is what I have been tipped at a wedding. And again, that's varies quite a bit based on the level of services I have provided and how involved I was in the wedding planning process and all of that. So pretty much whatever you feel comfortable with is kind of customary to tip your wedding planner. Additionally, you might have venue staff or an on-site coordinator that works for the venue you're getting married at, and it's fairly common to tip this staff or staff members as well, and that is usually and that also has a little bit of a range, usually about $50 to $200 per individual, kind of again based on how involved they were and how helpful they were in your wedding planning process. Now the vendors that are rarely tipped, your florist. I don't see florists get tipped all that much, which is honestly kind of surprising when you think about it, because they are doing a lot of work on the wedding day and performing really beautiful artwork essentially. So if you feel so inclined, a lot of florists that are doing actual installs, if they're doing, ground installations, arch installations, or something that requires on-site labor, you can tip your florist. What I've seen is kind of per individual or per florist that's on site, and like $50 to $100, not really a percentage of what your overall floral cost would be, and just to kind of show your appreciation for them delivering and installing on site. Or perhaps the florist may have over provided and gave you more flowers than you were kind of planning for, or that they initially charged you for, budgeted for. I've had this happen at weddings where she ended up having a lot of extra flowers than what they originally thought, and she was able to install this beautiful arch piece that was just like her initial inspiration, but in the planning process didn't think that they could produce that arch with the budget that she was given. So ultimately she ended up having her dream arch for not the total cost of what they initially quoted her for, and so she got a tip for that, of course. Delivery staff is another one that typically you're paying for the delivery charge already, so it's not really that common to be tipping them, but maybe if they are going above and beyond or delivering within a certain time request of yours or something like that and you want to tip them, usually like $20 per delivery is pretty common for that. And finally, your officiant. If you are hiring a officiant, you can tip them if they are a non-clergy member. So if it's someone from the clergy, they typically will not accept any form of tip. You will likely be given the option to make a donation to whatever they are a part of. However, if it's a non-clergy member, if they're just a professional officiant, you can tip them typically about $50 to $100 range is what I see most often. So a couple of tips when it comes to tips. I highly recommend preparing these tips ahead of time and having them ready to go in labeled envelopes so that you're able to easily distribute them on the wedding day. And it's also helpful if you can kind of appoint somebody to do this for you so that you're not having to track down these vendors unless you face-to-face do want to be the one to give them their tips. But commonly that's something that I do as a wedding coordinator, is have the couple provide me all of the labeled and ready to go tips so that I can distribute before they all leave for the evening. Also, make sure you are incorporating these tip amounts into your overall budget so that you don't get to the end of your wedding planning and you have this big chunk of extra money that you didn't account for that are all of the tips that you're planning on providing your wedding vendors. It's also helpful to keep your checkbook with you on your wedding day or some cash on hand in case there's additional people you want to tip or additional staff members that you weren't initially planning for that you want to tip on the day. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we'll see you next week.